You are listening to the 2 CFL Podcast, a proud member of the Canadian Football Podcast Network.
And I'm Travis Currah. Sheldon Jones is here, and also JC Abbott of 3DownNation.com. We will talk to him very soon. I just want to start the show off with sending condolences to the family of Lyle Bauer. He was a 3-time Grey Cup champion as a player with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a longtime executive there, an executive with the Calgary Stampeders, and a great man off the field as well. He was the founder of the Never Alone Foundation, supporting those battling cancer, making sure that they don't feel alone in their journey. So a great loss for the CFL world today at 65 years old. I know that's a somber note to start the show with, but here we are, less than 24 hours removed from the CFL Draft and Global Draft. JC Abbott from 3DownNation had a 4-hour live stream yesterday with Ben Grant. I thought you'd be in Turks and Caicos with a little drink with your umbrella in today joining us. So thanks for taking the time again to talk about this draft.
Well, there will be a vacation coming up just as training camps get underway, but got a couple more days worth of work before that happens. So I'm happy to be on here and talking more about the draft. It's my favorite topic every single season. So glad to be able to do it again.
It kind of makes things feel real. The training camp, the rookies report in about a week, full camp a little bit after that. But you are a big reporter when it comes to the global initiative. So I do want to start there. The league's entering the 5th year of the global initiative. How have you seen that evolve and change over even just the past couple years here?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how both the league's approach to it and how the entire global infrastructure has really changed throughout that initiative. I mean, it started out pretty much slapped together in that first season in 2019. There was only about, I think, 15 players eligible on the European side. They just did a 1-round draft there, and then drafting a bunch of players out of Mexico. It was thrown together. Then they decided to invest a bunch of money. I think a lot of people would argue too much, having combines all around the world, sending Greg Quick on an international odyssey to try and find talent. And that was met with sort of a meh response from people. And of course, COVID didn't help. That delayed that whole process. But now they've really pivoted and focused a lot more heavily on the guys coming out of the NCAA ranks who are meeting those global criteria. And you saw a big jump in sort of the impact that some of those players have had early on in their careers. Guys like Blessman Taala, who was the first overall pick for the Red Blacks last year, getting on the field and seeing time sometimes as a spot starter for them. Other guys along the defensive line like Thibaut Dabai in BC, who've been very successful as NCAA guys. Now the big question for me going forward is you see this 2024 draft class, and it's loaded with NCAA talent, not only the punters, but the players. But the NFL has also shifted how they're doing their international initiative. They've always had the IPP program. Typically, they've forced 4 teams to take on an additional practice roster spot. They've had some success with that. Now they've opened it up. All 32 teams have an additional spot now, and they're allowed to scout it themselves. So it's not guys coming from overseas necessarily that are being trained and put forward by the NFL. Now these same college players that the CFL is looking for are eligible for those IPP spots. And you see almost all of these guys, with the exception of the American Samoans, who are eligible for the CFL global program, but not the IPP in the NFL. Basically, everyone else has an NFL opportunity, and they're going to spend at least a year down there on a practice roster. So it's a tough balance because that benefits the CFL if they come up here. But if they're going to languish down there, then it takes longer for the talent to come up here and reduces the global program's impact.
The NFL piggybacking our rules again, JC.
It's interesting. The expansion has mirrored very much what we've done here. And there are valid critiques of the global program, don't get me wrong, and how it's been handled at various stages. And I don't frankly think it's ever going to be the moneymaker that it was sold at the start. But there is value there, and the NFL sees it just like the CFL sees it. Everyone wants a piece of these international players. And unfortunately, once the big guy in the kiddie pool gets in, right, it takes up all the water away from the CFL, who is going to end up having the scraps. But if they can get some of those guys after a stint on a practice roster, they are impact potential players.
The CFL draft goes down yesterday, and Joel Dublanko goes first overall to the Edmonton Elks. This seems like an absolute home run. They've since actually released linebacker Enoch Makonzo, that the Elks invested some, pretty high draft capital in him. So clearly they're pretty high up on him, and why not? He's got pro experience. Not only was I impressed, with his on-field work, but his off-the-field work. This is just a no-brainer for Edmonton. He's got family there, and it looks like this could be a pretty impact draft pick right off the bat for the Edmonton Elks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parts of Edmonton's draft that I wasn't crazy about, but this was a grand slam home run at the top. The easiest pick that any CFL GM will ever have to make. The comp is to Alex Singleton, right? Another guy with big time NCAA experience who had gone to the NFL first before coming to Canada. Another guy entitled to citizenship through his parent. But Dublanko, I think, had a more storied college career, undoubtedly, in his time at the Cincinnati Bearcats. He was an all AAC linebacker, helped drag that team into the college football playoff as a Power 5 program. And the tape is really good, right? He was starting in the USFL last season. Teams were going to look at him as an American, and now they're going to be able to bring him in. Maybe he doesn't start day one, but he certainly could, and he's going to end up on the field at some point as a starter this season if Niles Morgan goes down. And we saw what happened with Singleton. If he can continue on that trajectory, there are great things ahead for Joel Dublanko.
Yeah, so JC, you said there were some other parts of the Edmonton draft that had you scratching your head a little bit, maybe, but what were some other teams that had you scratching your head?
In terms of scratching my head, Edmonton was the big one. Obviously, there are some drafts I love more than others. There are other drafts that I see flaws in. I think beyond Edmonton, the one pick that I wonder if the team made the best decision was the Ottawa Redblacks at number 2. Now, they had to go receiver, and they did with Nick Mardner. And I think there's a lot of potential for him to be a game-breaking player there. But I would have gone with Kevin Mattal. I just think he is more ready day one to come in and fit into that offense. It's a team that needs someone who can start right away. Mardner's potential might be higher, but because he's so tall, he's a little bit stiff. He's not polished as a route runner, and he hasn't played the Canadian game for a while. So I comp him to a guy like Justin McInnes, who there was people viewed very highly when he was picked, I believe, 6th overall in his draft, and it didn't really translate right away. He had to go through some growing pains. There were off the field things as well. I know he came in out of shape one year because he had to be a stay-at-home dad during COVID and things like that. But it took him a while before he became the player that he is now, which is an impact starter for the BC Lions. I wonder if it's going to take Mardner a year or two as well, whereas Mattal, I see him as stepping in day one on a Canadian field and making an impact just like he did at Laval. I mean, nobody at the Combine caught more passes, and I think he can be a possession guy right away.
Nice. So kind of piggybacking on you saying that the Elks pick of Dublanko was a grand slam home run. What are some other home runs from some other teams that you noticed there?
Well, I think I love the high upside guys, and I think Ben is a little bit lower on them than maybe I was when we were going back and forth on the drafts. But I think 4, Ben LaBrosse, in terms of what he brings to Calgary, the defensive back from McGill, and at 16, Luke Brubaker, the uber athletic defensive end from Laurier. If those guys hit on their skill set and what they are capable of, they are absolute game-breaking, ratio-changing type of players. I think the Saskatchewan Roughriders, their 2 first picks are exceptional selections, but they're going to have to wait on them, right?
Yeah.
Kyle Hergel, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think if he ever comes to Canada and he doesn't stick with the New Orleans Saints, we're talking about a Hall of Fame caliber player. And I've said that basically since he was a sophomore in college because I've been that high on this kid's game. He is one of the best, most polished offensive linemen that I've ever seen. And there are people in the league who will echo that sentiment. That's why you take him that high as a future, is because he was not going to exit the first round, even with that NFL opportunity hanging over him. And then Nick Weeb, the only reason he goes at 12 is because he tore his ACL in the Hardy Cup playoffs. This is a kid who has the work ethic because he walked on at Oregon and made a name for himself with that program. And then he comes back to Canada with the Saskatchewan Huskies and is an absolute baller in the middle of the defense. You're grabbing, I think, your potential future starting middle linebacker at 12. That's absolutely insane value for Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Just it seems like a little bit of risk reward for the Riders overall with their draft class. I've heard a lot of the analysts say they got great value with Duncan Busby, the receiver, and Malik Straker, the linebacker. And then down the list, maybe a polarizing player among analysts is Adjo in the 7th round. I watched the video of the Elks, G-Roy, and Chris Jones kind of grilling him in the interview room. Like, it feels like if he turns out, it'll be incredible, but not really a surprise if he doesn't. Is that why he ended up in the 7th round?
That's exactly why you take him in the 7th round, right? The upside is unlike anybody else you're going to grab at that point in the draft, because let's not forget, for all the problems he's had in recent years, just a few years ago, we were talking about this kid as being a player who's making an impact for Clemson, a major college football program, as a true freshman from Brooks, Alberta, right? We thought he was going to be the next big thing as a Canadian receiver, somebody like a Josh Palmer or a John Mechie who was going to be able to make it to the NFL with high acclaim. It didn't pan out that way, and frankly, I just think it's a maturity issue. I had a chance to sit down with him at the Combine. He's incredibly charismatic. He's a smiley kid. I got the impression that he hasn't fully matured yet either. I think a lot of teams got that impression. That red flag is real. But ultimately, there's a lot of immature people out there in a football locker room. And if you can get him guided in the right direction and with the right people around him, if he can get back to that person he was at Clemson, where he was 6'2", 240 pounds and running, 5% body fat and running 24 miles per hour, like that is a difference maker at the CFL level. Now, I would lean to the fact he's not going to get there, but even if it's a 10% chance, there's nobody else in the 7th or 8th round that's a 10% to get anywhere close to that. So it's a great gamble by the Riders, who are already deep at Canadian receiver. They got better at their backup spot with Duncan Busby. They took another guy with huge upside, a local kid, and Deshaun Mims from Regina in the round before Adjo, and then they get Adjo as well. That's 3 guys who, if they hit on their upside, can actually turn into impact receivers on a team that already has 3 impact starting receivers and another pretty good backup in Mitch Picton.
I do want to ask about the Stampeders, who seems like they've kind of reloaded the cupboard here over the past couple days. Even today, as we're talking, they've signed veteran offensive lineman Kyle Saxlid, and they made a trade with Winnipeg to get 2 picks in the first round. We talked about LaBrosse a little bit, but they also signed Chrissy Inaku, the offensive lineman there. By all accounts, looks like a pretty nasty guy on the offensive line, and now things have looking pretty good for Dave Dickinson and company there.
Yeah, I think they've handled it very smartly at the top to be able to move up and get what they got in the first round. There was no way Ben LaBrosse was going to get past them. I know we didn't have him mocked there, but I had a sense very early on at the combine that Dwayne Cameron, their CFL draft coordinator, who also happens to be their DB coach, was in love with LaBrosse. So I had an inkling that that might be the spot where he ended up going. They're upgrading that position immediately with him, and Nakanu fills their need along the offensive line. Now with Saxely there, Saxely can start at tackle. You can start Bryce Bell at tackle if you need to. You can start Christy Nakanu at tackle if you need to. You have the flexibility to go with 4 Canadian offensive linemen there, which is huge. I wasn't as enamored with the middle of their draft. I thought they reached on a couple of guys like George Adoko, and I wasn't as high on Paul Antoine Ouellette, but they're adding quality special teams bodies, which they desperately needed. That team is undergoing a period of transition where they're losing basically all of their special teams captains who are retiring out at this stage. So they had to refresh the cupboards there, and they got great value in the later rounds with Jackson Sombak and Kalen St. Cyr, who are 2 DBs that I had ranked much higher than where they ultimately went. So those 2 guys can come in and add depth behind LaBrosse if he starts alongside guys like Nick Stotts. So a solid draft overall for the Stampeders that hit on the areas that they needed to hit on.
So, JC, what's your thoughts on BC and Winnipeg getting those extra special picks for having the most Canadian snaps?
I much prefer it to the old model of the territorial exemption extra picks. I mean, for me, that was always sort of poorly put together and poorly conceived. You're rewarding teams for being bad in a draft that already rewards you for being bad because that's the order of the draft. Those guys don't really need an additional selection. And B, you're limiting them by keeping it within the territory. So depending on which team you are in that given draft year, you may actually be hampering them in a significant way, right? Like if it had been Winnipeg this year and it had to have been a territorial selection, there really wasn't anybody from Manitoba besides AK Gasama, who goes later in the 6th round, I believe it was. So are you going to reach on him at the back end of the second just because he's from Winnipeg? To me, that's unfair to the kid because of the expectations. It's unfair to the team. This is much better. I like that it's rewarding teams that play their Canadians and giving them the opportunity to build more depth there. And I love that it's opened up so that they can actually take the best players available.
I look in that second round from Winnipeg, and they seemed like they were able to load up. And they have, I think, a luxury that not every team has. Like, a lot of their stars are already Canadian, so they get to wait and develop these guys a little bit. But it looks like they've got some nasty players in the trenches, and Gabe Wallace and Kyle Sampson that they can develop for a year or two before getting them in there. The Bombers just continue, it looks like, to grab some great Canadians to help their winning culture.
They really do. And I loved that second round from them, having the poise and the patience to move back and wait on your guys, right? They needed to get younger on special teams. This is a team that's been so great in that facet of the game for so long, but saw a little bit of a decline last season. Those aging veterans are starting to move out and they needed to refresh. Well, Kevin Sklercius at 13 and Michael Chris Ike at 14. Yeah, they're a receiver and a running back. In reality, they're just going to be 2 of your best special teams players because they are dominant in that phase of the game in the NCAA, where, quite frankly, there are a lot less opportunities to be dominant in special teams playing 4-down football. They're already doing that at a high level. Gabe Wallace gives you what you needed in terms of depth on the offensive line. And I've got a man crush on Kyle Sampson from UBC. That's a little bit of bias from a Thunderbird alum over here in Vancouver, but he is tremendous as a defensive tackle. He can 2-gap if you need him to. He shows way more pass rush upside than most of the guys that strong. He got knocked for short arms But quite frankly, when Jake Thomas retires, they've got Cameron Lawson, who's that next guy. I think Sampson can easily slot in behind Lawson in that same role that he was for Thomas, and might actually end up being better than Lawson in the long run. He's a guy that I think has tremendous upside.
Well, let's stay with BC a little bit here. Now, they they drafted this player in 2015. And look, it happened around draft day. Look, finally, it's happening. Christian Covington is coming to Vancouver. They lose Matthew Betts to the NFL here, but I feel like the addition in Christian Covington, plus their draft class here, hosting the Grey Cup. Look, this seems like an amazing couple days here for the Lions as well.
Yeah, it's a huge signing for the Lions, and you do want to temper expectations because there has been in the past a number of big name former NFL guys who have come up, particularly at that defensive tackle position, and haven't had great success. I think of Vaughn Martin and Stephen Charles, who both did that in the past few years. But for me, Covington's a little bit different because he's a local kid, who has loved this team forever. He's the son of a CFL Hall of Famer and loves this league. And from the moment he was drafted, even though he knew he had his NFL opportunity, he's been vocal about the fact that he's thrilled to be a Lion. So I think this is more in the John Ryan sort of bucket list area than anything else. This is a guy who's made his money. He's 30 years old. He's probably at the end of his career, and his hometown team is hosting the Grey Cup, and he has a chance to maybe make one more run and end it in storybook fashion if he's coming in motivated to do that. And I think he will, because I know his old high school coaches, and they worship the ground he walks on in terms of his character and his work ethic. He can come in and make an impact for this Lions team, potentially push them over the top and walk away a champion. We'll see when we talk to him tomorrow. He's going to have a media availability, what he says in regards to that plan. But it certainly sounds like a great finish to a career if that were to happen.
That's pretty cool. Now, we haven't given much love to the Eastern teams here yet, so let's take that opportunity here. And just personally, I noticed since Danny Machocha came back into the fold for the Alouettes, he was focusing a lot on the players from Quebec and the local draft picks, but that's kind of it seems like gone away a little bit. It seems like Montreal, the champs, they're pretty good when it comes to that part of their roster, but before them, a couple Laval players going to Toronto and to Hamilton. Is that why they've kind of gone away with that, or how do you see Danny Machocha shaping the Alouettes?
I think Machocha's strategy has always been that it's a tiebreak, right? He's going to take the best player available, but if he's got two guys close and one's from Quebec, he'll lean that way. And I think maybe that comes into effect at 9 overall, because although he played at Memphis and Syracuse before that, Jeffrey Contin-Arcu is from Lévis, Quebec, right? So he's a local guy, and he was tremendous value at that spot. Maybe not at a position that the Alouettes desperately needed, but too tough to pass up on a potential starter at linebacker at the back end of the first round. And then you get really, really solid guys who can come and be a part of your rotation in Arthur Hamlin, who I think immediately becomes their best backup behind Marc-Antoine Dequoy, and Mike Arone, who maybe didn't test super well, but is a very technical football player, and I think will eventually find a role on that defensive line that will need to replace the production that Luol Uguak had last year as a rookie. So some solid picks up near the top of the draft for the Alouettes.
How about those Ticats drafting guys the same year that they last won the Grey Cup? I had to throw in some shade at the Ticats, but I feel like hosting the Grey Cup 2 out of the past, 3 seasons, maybe that pressure can be off a little bit and they can just get out there and play. But it does look like there are people that are high up on the Ticats draft class, with Ed Hervey first time being in the GM chair for the Cats.
Yeah, I've been critical of Hervey's draft style in the past. I thought he nailed this one. I thought the Ticats had the best draft of anyone out there. Dumoulin Duguay in the first round at 7. So maybe not a position of immediate need for the Ticats because they've got all stars up front there on their offensive line. But if you look at the raw numbers, both their Canadians and their Americans, nobody is spending more up front on the offensive line than the Ticats, and it's frankly not even close. All of those guys are 200,000 plus players, and they're on expiring deals. So if you want to get cheaper and younger next season, if you're going to lose some of those guys, you need to have quality backups who can step in. Dumoulin Duguay and Dayton Black, who they drafted in the first round last year, they can be your 6th and 7th guys this year and become potential starters in 2025 and beyond. So that's an excellent selection there. Luke Brubaker, I mentioned, is one of my favorite picks of the entire draft. He can become part of the D end rotation with Mason Bennett right away. And I think if he continues on his trajectory, he's an NFL player in 3 years, right? He is a guy who at 6'5", 246 pounds, jumps a 38-inch vertical. That is freakish,
Wow.
beyond belief. And he has only played football for 3 seasons. Never played a snap in high school. He walked on in college. He was a boxer. He just decided one day, hey, I think I'm going to email the football coach. I think that might be fun. And he got blown off initially. They said, what are you even talking about? Then he sent them a workout video, and they're like, yes, please come here tomorrow. We would like to see you. And he immediately became a starter for the Golden Hawks, and over the past 3 seasons has been one of the best defensive ends in the OUA. So with his tools and his lack of experience, if he can develop in a pro program, you're talking about a possible ratio breaker. And then they just added quality special teams depth the rest of the way. A couple of UBC kids that I absolutely love, despite some maybe lackluster testing results for them. Daniel Bell from Mount Allison is a fantastic DB/linebacker who's a 2-time AUS defensive player of the year. So really, really solid players across the board for the Ticats.
And so tell us about the Argos. They had a big 3rd round this year.
The Argos, to me, did a really nice job without having any major needs. But the pick to me that stands out isn't in the 3rd round. It's the fact that they got Kevin Mattal at 5th overall. I didn't think he would be there for them, and they didn't flinch. They didn't panic. They didn't say, well, this isn't our biggest need. They got a guy who can potentially start day one. And while I think they were already comfortable with their receiving core and the ability to maybe start 2 guys there, now they have to be overjoyed because I think Mattal can slot in there right away. The 2022 Heck Crichton Trophy winner and arguably the greatest receiver in U Sports history in terms of how dominant he was at his peak. And just nice, solid picks the rest of the way. Special teams contributors, guys who maybe slipped for one reason or another, like Justin Sambu going in the 6th round, but who have high upside and big-time college pedigree. I think they got a really solid draft class, and they didn't need to because we all know how good Toronto's Canadian talent is. Well, it just got better.
Yeah, I'll finally just ask about the Ottawa Red Blacks. We mentioned Nick Mardner going in the, number 2 overall. Probably not going to see him a little bit here. Is that kind of a risk that the Ottawa Red Blacks were willing to take? I feel like this is a pretty big year for them. They need to, and like a lot of teams, everybody wants to win. Everybody's getting paid, so everybody's trying to get better. But the Red Blacks and the Elks especially, they want to put some more winning teams on the field, especially at home. How did you like Ottawa's draft day?
The Mardner pick, as I mentioned, I think is a solid pick. He's a 1st-round player. I just think he's going to take a little bit longer than Mattal, so I wonder about that for a team whose need is very immediate. Okpoko in the 2nd round, very solid pick. I think he's got an extremely high floor. I don't like his ceiling as much as some other guys, but he's going to be able to come in and contribute right away. He's going to be a very solid player for you. Dawson Pierre in round 3. Those are all solid picks. But I come away from their draft with that impression. Solid picks across the board, but nobody I say, wow, I can't believe they snagged him there. That guy is tremendous value, or whatever it may be. Like I've said with some of these other draft classes, they didn't make any major mistakes. They're not going to come away saying, man, I really regret all of this. But I thought there were maybe some opportunities that other teams seized to take bigger shots. And the one shot they did take is probably Mardner, and I'm not on as high on him as other people. So that probably reduces my opinion of their draft overall.
CFL draft day in the books. I think there were 3 draft parties across the country. Sheldon, I'll just quickly ask you. It looked like there was a pretty good turnout in Regina. Like, how was that situation that they had there?
Yeah, it was good. There's probably like 250 people, I would say, there, and they had Jeremy O'Day and Coach Mace come and talk for 10 or 15 minutes before they headed into the war room, and they did it last year too, and I think this was a big improvement. They actually, I think last year they probably expected 40 people to show up and were surprised when 100 showed up, but this year they actually had some refreshments, some food and for people to come, and they gave away some prizes, and it was actually really fun.
I think it's cool to see teams doing that.
Yeah.
I know Ottawa did it. And JC, I just want to ask you, you guys did, the 4-hour stream. We did it. Maybe we got the John Hodge bump, but it was like the most downloads and views we've got in the off season. Maybe it was, they wanted to look at that glorious beard of his. But it does seem like people want this content. They're hungry for this content, even in the middle of the Stanley Cup playoffs with some Canadian teams having some success here. It feels like this thing is, I don't know. I'm the ever optimist, but it just seems like this is slowly growing, and it feels like if we're willing to put in the effort and maybe spend a little money, then the CFL draft could be a bigger deal than ever in future years.
To me, it's important to keep doing it because I don't know if it's never going to reach the NFL draft stage. The guys making immediate impact aren't quite the same, and it's never going to outdraw the NHL playoffs. I think the numbers prove that, but there is a section of the fan base that cares very deeply about their teams and do show interest in that. And people respond to what you give them the opportunity to respond to. If you treat this like it doesn't matter, and that people shouldn't care about it, well, they're not going to care about it. If you care about the prospects and you put forward the stories and you tell some of these guys the path that they've been on, the things they've done in their lives are truly remarkable, right? They are interesting people involved in this process that fans can grow an attachment to and care about long before they put on the jersey of their favorite team. And if you're willing to make that investment, yeah, the returns might not be immediate, but you see year over year, there's a little bit more, right? There's a little bit more people invested. There's a little bit more people who care about it as long as you give them the content to be able to do so. So it's a labor of love for me. I'm going to keep doing it and keep pounding the pavement. And I hope other people do as well, because I think these prospects deserve it. And these incredible CFL fans deserve to be treated like they are, intelligent and invested just as they are in the season into these processes and the way that their teams are constructed. We can't treat it as an afterthought.
Yeah, even I did a Vanier Cup preview after the Grey Cup, and I don't know, maybe the U Sports crowd is more on YouTube or what it is, but the people are hungry for that content and hungry to see where those players go in their pro career. So, hey, I think you deserve a break for all the work that you put in with the CFL draft, the global draft. JC Abbott of 3Down Nation, thanks so much for coming on the show. Now, if you get to go on vacation, what does that look like? Sleeping for 14 hours, somewhere in the mountains, a beach? What do you figure?
I'm going to take a little trip, I think, to Turkey here coming up. So
whoa,
that's an interesting one. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Gotta go scout out the next generation of global talent.
There you go.
Yeah.
The work never stops. Thanks so much for coming on the show and helping us with your expertise here. And we love the work. So thanks for making us feel smart too.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Have a great one.
Thanks for listening. Find more great shows like this at CF Pod Network on Twitter.